Hello, and welcome to another episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla, and I read a ton of books so that I can recommend the best to you, and that is what we are doing today. Welcome to the show. Full disclosure, I have not been sleeping well, so I'm currently in that state where you're like so overtired that you feel like a crazy person, and then I have had so much caffeine. I always have two coffees, but I had two of the extra caffeine pods from Nespresso, and then I literally just like chugged. I made myself a little flat white with a double espresso shot. So I'm like feeling crazy, but I'm excited to record. I also just freaking love recording. So happy to be here. Hope you're happy to be here too. Few announcements. Our book club pick for February is The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. If you are new to PBG, you can just read it on your own and join us for the book club episode on Leap Day, February 29th, where I will be kind of covering the book full of spoilers, giving you all of my thoughts. Check out the January episode where I covered Tomorrow. Had a lot of thoughts on that book. If you listen to it, you know. And you can be a part of the book club episode by submitting your thoughts to me. Either type them out in a DM, email them to me at professionalbookgirlpod@gmail.com, or record a voice recording or a video, and I will include it in the episode so that way we can get a bunch of different opinions. It's going to be so much fun. Really quickly, please make sure you're following, subscribe, whatever gets you on every podcast platform you are listening on. Follow me on Instagram, Kerri. Follow the show at Professional Book Girl, and leave a little review on Apple Podcasts if you feel so inclined, because it is a free way to support me. It's time to talk about what I'm obsessed with this week. I have been so busy, like so social, really just like a girl about town lately. And it's been fun. I've been having fun. I may be a little burnt out, but it's fine. I'm having fun. But I've been going to so many like fun bookish things. So I thought I would do a little roundup, tell you about what I've been up to in the last few weeks. Something that I've never spoken about publicly, but might be surprising to people who don't live in New York City. So I live in New York City, if you're not aware, and I mean, like, best city to live in for fun, cool shit to be happening. I've gotten to go to so many cool events and things, which like obviously wouldn't happen if I didn't live in New York. We're very lucky that like every artist tours here, and like all the shows that happen here are so meaningful because our venues are so iconic, which obviously there's iconic venues in other places too, but we just have so many here, you know? But actually, most authors don't stop in New York on book tours. And I know what you're thinking, like, Kayla, you're obviously about to talk about how you met Sarah J Maas a few weeks ago, which obviously I am. And I have gone to so many really cool and special author events. But a lot of the time when I'm like scrolling on Instagram and I see an author that I love is like posting their book tour, there is no New York stop. I have asked a friend who works in publishing, and it's kind of, I think they just like, the gist I got was that there's so much happening in New York that they like can't guarantee turnout, which is just like stupid to me. If any publishers of authors I love are listening, please schedule some New York book events. But I did, like I said, go to a few fun things in the last few weeks. So first up, I went to Bibliotech, which was not an event. Me and my friend Steph just went and had like a lovely evening. It is a new bookstore / wine bar in Soho, which really interesting location. If you are not familiar with New York City, Soho has kind of turned into like the mall. Like when you walk down Broadway, there's every single store there. I live close to Soho. I spend a lot of time in Soho. I always have. I worked at the Top Shop there all through college. Like, so many interesting experiences have happened to me at that store. But so I love Soho, but it is a little bit like super touristy, like don't go on the weekend really type of vibe. But this place opened. It's really cute. It's really beautiful. I posted about it on my Instagram story when I went. I'm interested to go during the day when it's more of like a cafe, but the shelves are gorgeous. Like you almost it doesn't even look like a bookstore. It looks like you're just in like this beautiful library, and you can shop the books. And then we went at night. So we had food and drinks. They had like a nice mocktail menu. So I got an alcohol-free Negroni, which was exciting to just drink something different. And it was really lovely. It was really beautiful. Just, it's in an interesting location, I say, because it's like in the middle of a bunch of stores. So like I wouldn't like expect it to be where it is, but just another like cool little bookish spot in the city, which is exciting. And then the main event, which I obviously already teased, it's so funny. I wish that Just the timing of when the episode I recorded in like the Aaron-sode with my sister, because we recorded that in the past, obviously. So after we recorded that episode, we went to the Sarah J Maas midnight release party for Crescent City 3 at Book Club, which is another great bookstore cafe in New York City. Definitely check that out if you are visiting. And I've never been to a midnight release party before. I mentioned this in the past. I didn't read Harry Potter until I was an adult, so I missed out on that. And then I went to the midnight release movies for Twilight, but that was just different, because you're just sitting down to see a movie. So me, my sister, and my friend Dotsie, who is at For the Books on Bookstagram, went together, and it was the night of our lives, really. So we got there. It started at 9:30, and they were going to give the books at midnight, obviously. And we got there at like 10:15, like fashionably late. So we showed up and we like sussed out the scene, and then we were like, had free drink tickets. So they had like 3 Crescent City themed cocktails. They couldn't make any of those as a mocktail for me, but they did make me a really delicious like cider mule mocktail. So I was happy about that. And then we were like right about to order our drinks though, and the way that book club is set up, it's like you walk in and like the bar, and they have a full bar, so the bar is like on the right, and it's kind of like a narrow pathway, and then it opens up into like the rest of the bookstore. So we were like in that entryway pathway, and all of a sudden, like, I'm always, I guess it's because I live in New York, like I know the signs when someone is coming in, when something is about to happen. I've had like a million celebrity encounters. Like you can just tell when something's going on. So all of a sudden I was like, something is going on here. And I like got like Dotsie and my sister's attention. And I was like, guys, like, what's happening? And then all of a sudden we were like, oh my God, Sarah J Maas showed up at the midnight release party. No one there knew it was supposed to happen. Obviously the bookstore knew, but like none of the guests knew. She showed up. Time Magazine was with her. We are in the Time Magazine TikTok. We just got so lucky with where we were standing when she came in. So she had to walk right by us, and go to my Instagram, KRedWhat. It's very obvious which when the post is, because the photo is me and my sister talking to her, and then you swipe through, and the shock and like happiness on our faces. And it's so funny because on our way there, we were like, imagine she shows up, and my sister like just had a feeling. She was like, we figured she was going to go to Barnes and Noble in Union Square for their midnight release party, which she did. She was there at midnight, but my sister just like had a feeling, and she was right. And the whole time we were walking there, we were like saying how pretty she is. And then like she is stunning in person. She's so beautiful. So she walked literally right by us, and we were all like, our faces in those photos, like jaws on the floor, the biggest smiles. And she was like, hi, and just like said hi to us and walked by, and we were flipping out. And then she went to the back and got on the microphone and like said hello. And she ordered, like, everyone got rounds of champagne on her. And she was like, we're not doing pictures. I'm not signing. Like, we're just going to talk. And then she kind of held court in the back of the store, and we warmed our way up, and we got in, and we're just like, I was in conversation with her for like 10 minutes. It was so cool. I was like, I didn't know what to say to her. I was like, okay, if I get the chance to like say something, I was going to say like something about how like Nesta's character in A Court of Silver Flames like meant so much to me when I just reread it. But it was very like upbeat. She was talking, like, she's very good at those types of situations. So she kind of just like kept conversation going, and then we would all like interject in between it. My sister did ask her a question though. My sister was like, she was like, do you look at fan theories? And Sarah said no, like she doesn't. She's like, I don't even have social media on my phone. Like she doesn't look at any of the fan theories, which I find so interesting, especially on TikTok, like the fan theories for her books are insane. So that was like a cool little tidbit, but it was just such a cool, special moment. And then my friend Dotsie like got into conversation with her a little bit later, and Dotsie has been reading her book since Throne of Glass came out, so she's been in it for so long with her. So I was so happy they had their moment and got to speak, and I was like paparazzi when they were speaking. And also, so book club had a photographer there, and then Sarah rolled in with a photographer, a videographer. Like I said, Time Magazine was with her. So when I was speaking with her, like the photo I posted, I feel like my eyes are so big also, because it was like Taylor Swift, all the flashing lights, like non-stop lights in your face. And I've been around paparazzi before just because of like living in New York, but I've never experienced the lights in your face like that. And like I thought I was gonna like pass out. Like, it is so trippy and you almost like can't think. And that's part of also why I was like, how am I going to speak to this woman? Because I'm being blinded and it's like nonstop, like strobe lights in your face. Like, it's so crazy. Like, I gained so much more respect for all the celebrities who deal with it all of the time. But it was so cool. So then after, like the next day, book club posted and we were in like one of the photos, and then I DM'd the photographer and she sent me all of the photos, and I like went through and like we pulled the ones that we were in, obviously, and I posted them. And I texted my mom and I was like, look how happy me and Ariel look. And it was just like so joyful and so exciting and such like a happy surprise. And like it was just like so cool, just like a fun and like true New York experience. It was just really great and like a great way to kick off like reading that book, which I gave 5 stars, obviously. So much fun. And then I'm pre-recording this episode, fun fact. So last night, in my real life, in real time, I went to an event at Penguin Random House, which was like so cool. They invited me to a Galentine's and I got to bring a +1. So once again, I brought my friend Dotsie, and it was so cool. I got to meet so many other bookstagrammers who I just like only knew through Bookstagram. I ran into some that I knew. It's like kind of a fun circle of New York City bookstagrammers when you go to these things, even if it's just an author event like that you just go to, you're not invited to. You like run into people, which it's like this really cool community in real life that like I'm now a part of and I think is so special. And actually me and Dotsie ended up going out to eat after with like 2 of the girls, which we had such like a fun dinner. So it was so cool. We got like some books. I freaked out after because my mom was obsessed with the book The Cheat Sheet, which is like football romance, and I didn't read it, but when I looked in my gift bag later, there was an arc of the author's next book, and my mom has been like going through something, like there's like family shit going on in the background of my life right now. So I was like, oh my God, like I have happy news for you. And she was so happy. And it was just like such a cool event and moment. And I felt like Emily in Paris, and it felt like such a cool New York night. I like Ubered home, and the Uber went on Fifth Avenue, and I was just like, oh, like I live in New York. Like it's sometimes you just get hit. I've been here forever, but you just get hit with those like true like New York moments, which are so cool. And it was such a fun night. And if I doubt anyone from Penguin is listening, but if you are, thank you so much. It was so cool to just get to be at the offices, which was really insane. And just like I felt like I made it, you know? And then I'm in a real life book club. We read, it's like every other month, and it's every meeting is for we read a book from a different country and then we go to a restaurant from that country. So for the last one, I spoke about this in a mood reads a few episodes ago, but we read The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart, which I really loved, highly recommend. And then we went to an Australian restaurant for brunch. It was just so much fun. I just love getting together with like bookish girls. We obviously have things to talk about outside of books, but it's so much fun when you kind of like have that core, and then you can talk about books in a way that like you can't with your other friends that don't read, you know? So it was just, I've just been go, so busy. That's probably why I'm so tired. But yeah, it's good. I feel like in my January wrap up, I told you guys I was like feeling a little bit depressed and like not going anywhere. And it feels good to be like back out in the world, getting dressed, like doing hair and makeup, like seeing people, being social. It's been fun. So that's what I've been up to. I guess, I mean, we've already been talking about books, but the theme for this episode, I'm so excited. So today is President's Day, and like congrats to them. I guess we're not talking about any men on this episode. On today's episode, in honor of President's Day, we are going to be talking about badass American women. So this is going to be a historical fiction episode, but technically I would say biographical fiction, because I will be covering 3 books about 3 remarkable, amazing American women. I love historical fiction, as you know, and I got into historical fiction because I always loved history. It's like my family is obsessed with history. It's like we always say it's like my last name thing. And I like loved it so much growing up. My brother's a history teacher, and sometimes I get a little bit jealous of that. And in another life, I would be a history teacher. And whatever, I always loved it, right? And then I discovered historical fiction through Philippa Gregory's books about the Tudor women. And historical fiction, though, pretty much all of them that I read, which has been so many, are from the perspective of women, and it kind of just like unlocked like this part of the world really where I realized like, oh, this is a vehicle to learn about women in history, and it made me love history so much more because yeah, whatever, like some men have done like cool shit, I guess. Like I'm currently watching Masters of the Air, which is about men in World War II, and highly, highly recommend that, especially if you were a historical fiction girly. And it's like, okay, whatever, they're doing brave shit, but like, where are the women? Like, I want to know the women's stories. Like it's not to like place myself, but on my UK trip, I went to Bletchley Park, and I literally planned when I decided I was going to London, I was like, I need to go to Bletchley Park because one of my favorite books ever is The Rose Code by Kate Quinn, which is about Bletchley Park, which if you have seen the movie The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch, which is about Alan Turing, Keira Knightley is also in that because she's our historical period piece queen. It is Bletchley Park was where they were doing like all the code breaking in World War II. And then this book is about like the women who are working there. And I went, and it is like they have made it into a beautiful museum. It feels like you literally step back in time as you are walking on these grounds and in the buildings. It's so cool. It is so well done. And I went like on a weekday, it was pretty empty. And one of the workers was like, oh, like if you were alive in World War II, like you could have been here. Like, because it was mostly women working at Bletchley Park. And I was like, oh, like that's so cool. And I think that's why part of why it's so interesting. So you can think about what were women doing during all of these battles and these wars and these things that we learn about, and in school and in textbooks it's mostly the men that are centered, and like fuck that. I want to know what the women were doing because so many women through all of time have been doing cool, badass shit. And that is what we should be learning about. And I feel like my love for historical fiction just expanded my brain. And I love history even more than I did before. And I love learning about women in history. That is one of my like passion projects. Actually, on my UK trip, someone DM'd me and was like, are you a historian? And I was like, oh my God, thank you. But no, I'm like an armchair historian, I say. So I'm so excited. This is going to be so much fun because it is I love talking about books, obviously, but I really love talking about books about really cool, real women. And that is what we are doing right now. So let's get into it. Also, though, actually, last little note before we start. So these are all American women because President's Day, I guess, and I'm American. But it was really funny when I was looking at my shelves trying to decide who I wanted to talk about and what books. Most of the historical fiction I read actually isn't American, which I think part of that is due to it's like World War I, World War II, and there are great American stories for those wars. Off the top of my head, Angels of the Pacific, I almost was going to cover it on this episode, is about the real life angels of Bhutan, who were these American Red Cross nurses who got caught up and became prisoners of war in the Philippines during World War II. Highly recommend that. But it's like biographical fiction, I guess I would say. I feel like I'm just always reading about European women, which I also am like, if you guys know me, you know I'm obsessed with English history. That is one of my like, I don't even think it's like a niche historical obsession at this point. Like it is a historical obsession of mine. But I do love, like, maybe sometimes it's like, oh, I guess I feel patriotic when I'm reading about like a really cool American woman. So we are going to be talking about, like I said, 3 different real American women in 3 different time periods, which is also really fun. The first one, the first book, is The Secret Wife of Aaron Burr by Susan Holloway Scott. And we are heading back to the Revolutionary War, which, like, I want more Revolutionary War historical fiction. I'm pretty sure it's this author who is working on one about Martha Washington, which I'm very excited about. I'm a huge fan of this author. She also has one about Eliza Hamilton, I Eliza, which I loved. But like, I want more like, I guess because like when my first like niche historical obsession as a child was the Revolutionary War, and I would like beg my parents to take me to Williamsburg, and they were like, no. And like I have Felicity, American Girl doll, like I was just like so into it. Like when I finally saw the Liberty Bell, I was so excited when I went to on like the Freedom Trail. Is that what it's called in Boston when there's like a trail like throughout the city that you follow? I just like loved learning about it, as a child. And I don't read as much about it as an adult, but every now and then when like a fun one, which not really fun, but when like a good one pops up, I get so excited. And so this is a really great revolutionary, pre-revolutionary, and kind of the immediate post-revolutionary period in America. And the woman we are talking about is Mary Emmons. So Mary is The Secret Wife of Aaron Burr, as the title would suggest. It is a little known and not publicized, really, fact that he wed her secretly right after the duel and kind of before the duel in which he killed Alexander Hamilton. And as he was kind of like fleeing to Europe. So, who is Mary? How did they meet? Why was it a secret? So, Mary was an Indian woman. We meet her. This book opens as she is a child in India, and I think she was a bastard, and her whole family kind of hates her. And because of that, her uncle literally sells her into slavery. So, the first part of this book, it's a pretty long book. We go like all over the world. We cover so much history. This part was really interesting to me. So in India, that is when India was still under like the British Empire. So there were all these really wealthy, affluent English families in India who are like buying slaves. And Mary, her name was not Mary, but her owner changes it to Mary, gets sold to this woman to like pretty much like be her pet. Like so much of this book is hard to read, but it is so important that we read it, right? And like feel uncomfortable as we're reading it. That is important as we are reading about and learning about history and the real life atrocities that happen so that way we can honor Mary in the correct and proper way. So she was also like really beautiful, and that's part of like why she kept her, and she would make her wear like these like jewels. Like it was just like so fucked up, honestly. But so she's there for a little bit, and then I'm pretty sure maybe like that woman's husband died or something, and she gets up. They decide that they're bringing her to the Caribbean. So then we are following her on this like cross the oceans journey, which like, guys, I told you I hate the Oregon Trail, but also maybe in another past life I died on like a crossing of the Atlantic, because that sounds horrible. Like the Titanic sounded horrible. But even like now they're on these rickety boats. Like how did any of them actually, I don't understand. I don't understand how anyone in like, this is the 1700s. So even in like earlier, like what is it, 1462 or whatever with Columbus, like how were they just like making it across the ocean? Like didn't the waves fully knock it over? I don't know, maybe the Little Mermaid scarred me as a child, but oh my god, so scary, so scary. So she survives though, and she ends up in the Caribbean, where suddenly she is a very different type of slave, and she becomes a house slave. So she is not in the fields, but she, like, it's suddenly more dangerous, and there are a lot of men around that are looking to abuse her and take advantage. So her life changes so quickly, and like even though in India she was in a horrible position, she had a little bit more safety, even though she was obviously abused. It was just like, because it was kind of more isolated, there weren't as many threats around her constantly, right? So now she's in the Caribbean, and she ends up, I don't remember the exact circumstances, but she ends up getting kind of like bought by someone else, and he is the first husband of Theodosia Burr. So let's go back a little bit in history. So if you have seen Hamilton, you probably know this, but Aaron Burr, best friends with like, well, number one frenemy of Alexander Hamilton, but he's like in the crew with the founding fathers, right? Is he technically a founding father? I don't know. But Aaron Burr is obviously a revolutionary guy, right? A patriot. He, during the Revolutionary War, though, was having an affair with this woman, Theodosia, who was a loyalist, and her husband was fighting for the English. Like, scandal. That is so crazy. The first time I heard about it, I was like, that is insane. And he went on to marry her. So when we first meet Theodosia, which they also had a daughter named Theodosia, and there's a great book about her called Love Theodosia, that I highly recommend. Theodosia went on to marry in Alston, which is one of the big prominent families in South Carolina, and you can tour the Alston house. I went there like a year ago when I went to Charleston for the first time. It's a really beautiful house, and they have some of Theodosia's like surviving books on display. But we're talking about Theodosia the First, the wife. So She was like such an interesting woman. I guess you could say part of it is that like she was definitely playing both sides in the war, and it was kind of for her safety, I guess you could say. Sorry, I'm like all over the place as I tell this. There's another great historical fiction. I just have so many great historical fiction books to recommend you guys. There's another really great one called The Traitor's Wife, which is about Benedict Arnold's wife, who she was kind of doing the same thing. Like when the Patriots had control of where she lived, I think she was in Pennsylvania, she was suddenly a patriot. And then when the English took back control, then suddenly she was a loyalist, which like for your safety, I guess that makes sense, right? But just like when you think about the scandalousness of like having an affair with like both sides, it's like, oh my God, like salacious. Like current day, that would be like the biggest like scandal. So anyway, Theodosia, the wife, Aaron Burr's future wife, was married to a loyalist, and he in the Caribbean bought Mary, and he brings her to America to be a slave, obviously, but she kind of acts as like a lady's maid for Theodosia. So now Mary is in America, and now she's in like a very different setting, and Theodosia kind of like treats her pretty well. It's definitely a better situation than what she was in the Caribbean, and she's definitely safer, and she becomes really close with the other slaves in the household. She falls in love. She is taught how to read and write, and she's so smart. She is so strong. She, like, you read this and your heart breaks for her, but then you are rooting for her so, so much. So when she is there, she starts learning about the revolution. And this is like pre-Revolutionary War. Like they're kind of like talking about like, we're going to war. Like they're like gearing up to go to war, right? And all of the other slaves in the house are teaching her about it, specifically this one guy who she ends up like having a big crush on, because they are assuming that if the Americans win, then they'll be free, which obviously we know that didn't happen. So that was also like really hard to read because they're so hopeful and excited. And then they like the founding fathers just really like screwed them over so badly. But so she becomes a bit of like a revolutionist. She supports the revolution because she's assuming she'll be free then. And Theodosia knows this, and she kind of like she doesn't get mad though, I guess, that that there's revolutionaries, that's the word I was looking for, in the house, but because she's like playing both sides, so now there's like these prominent men from both sides coming in and out of the house, and slowly Aaron Burr just keeps showing up, and they start courting, and then Theodosia's husband died, I think, and she ends up marrying Aaron Burr, and then that is kind of when the story changes again. So then I'm sure there's like war stuff covered, and then we're in the post-war world where you follow Burr. I'm pretty sure he was governor of New York, so they end up in Albany for a bit, and it's very obvious when Aaron Burr first starts courting Theodosia that he has eyes for Mary. And this is when it gets a bit hard to read because he very clearly was grooming her, and she never gave consent to this relationship. So it's a little bit conflicting to read because she ends up having feelings for him, but she never had a choice in the relationship. So like you don't ever really root for them because there is somebody else that she would have preferred to have been with in this book. But time goes on, history goes on, and Mary is like Theodosia's number one girl. So she is with them everywhere that they go as they move around, as Burr's career kind of progresses. And he's like rising up and up to prominence. He was like vice president, and he was trying to be president forever. And Mary and Aaron eventually have children together, and he is like weirdly kind of like a good dad to those kids when he can be, and he affords her as much freedom as he can, but he refuses to free her, and that is something that is like constantly weighed on throughout the story. And then eventually I'm pretty sure she does end up getting freed, and it's like he's married to Theodosia, but then it's like he's like an upstairs downstairs wife. Like he's so fucked up, like such like a fucker, really. Like we hate him for so many reasons, right? But it makes me it's so angry, especially as you read this, because Mary was just, like I said, so strong, and she knew how to work him too. Like she knew how to make the best of this horrible situation that she was in. And she's very inspiring, like her strength. But they end up like getting married in secret, and it becomes like it's a secret, like it's not really public record. There are some record to prove it. There is like he had kids with her, and those kids went on and like he gave them his name. So I'm pretty sure he gave them his name. Someone will fact check me on that, I'm sure. But this is just such an important story to read. This is what I love about historical fiction, that this woman who lived in the shadow of this great American man — I don't say great as in he was a great person, I mean this huge figure, especially in the Hamilton musical age where everybody's talking about Aaron Burr. I knew about Theodosia. I read a book about their daughter, Theodosia, and I did not know about Mary Emmons. And I'm so happy that her story was brought to the forefront. It's really long. The writing is really rich, which is a hallmark of Susan Holloway Scott's writing. I think she just weaves the story in such a beautiful and entertaining way. Sometimes with the big historical fiction books like this, where there's just so much info, you can get a bit bogged down. But I loved this. I'm so happy I now know who Mary is and her story. Like I said, she was so strong. She was such a great mother, just did everything she could for her kids. It is a hard read at times, but it is an important read, and I loved it so much. That is The Secret Wife of Aaron Burr by Susan Holloway Scott. We're going to go forward a few hundred years in history to the 1940s and maybe the late 30s, and we are going to talk about Kit Kennedy, and the book is The Kennedy Debutante by Kerri Maher. I'm a huge fan of Kerri's historical fiction. This was the first one I read by her. I have a kind of sad but sweet emotional connection to this book. So I've always been fascinated by the Kennedys. I'm like most Americans, honestly, and my grandma was as well, and it's something we didn't realize that we shared until like I was an adult, like, and later in my grandma's life. And when I saw that this book was coming out, me and my grandma had just been talking about the Kennedys, and I was like, oh my God, I need to read this. So I bought 2 copies of it, and I mailed one to my grandma in Florida, and we both read it. And in the last conversation I had with her, she mentioned this book and that she was reading it again. And so this book will just always hold a special place in my heart. And actually, when my grandma died, I was like going through her books, and I took a few, and I took her copy of this book, and that is the one that I have sitting on my favorite shelf. So I will always love this book for that. But even before that, when I read it, I absolutely loved it. Kit Kennedy is such an interesting character, and she gets lost in the shadows of her brother, honestly brothers. And I'm just so happy that Kerri brought her to the forefront with this book. It is so good. So let's talk about Kit Kennedy. First of all, obsessed with the nickname Kick. Her name was Kathleen, but I just love that they called her Kick. And this book takes place when I think his name was Joseph, JFK's dad, was the American ambassador in England. And this is like right before World War II. And he was a very controversial figure. I'm pretty sure he was kind of like an isolationist. Like he didn't want America involved. And I don't think he really like, I don't know. I'm once again probably like misquoting something, but I'm pretty like, I just know that like he wasn't really well liked. Um, and he, though, was very much like, one of my sons is going to be a president. And he thought it was going to be his oldest son, Joe, who unfortunately died during World War II. So this book, though, is about Kick, and we meet her in her debutante season in London. So that is why it's called the Kennedy Debutante. Since they were living there, she and her sisters had a season. So they were presented to the king and queen. They were going to all the parties, think Bridgerton with Daphne, but like in the 1930s, because it's something that happened until I think like the 50s might have been the last season. And so you follow her, you know, she has to wear like the white dress and the feathers, and she does the whole thing, and she's out in London society, and she meets a man, I forgot his name, but he was in line to be the next Duke of Devonshire. And this is when I just love talking about this stuff. So pivot to talk about the history of a house, Chatsworth House. I went here on my UK trip. If you go on my TikTok, Read What, I have a little like vlog of it. Chatsworth House was used as Pemberley in the 2005 Keira Knightley version of Pride and Prejudice. So set the scene, that is what it looks like. But the history of this house is so fascinating. Like this is when I just like you can't make this shit up. I love history. So famous Duchess of Devonshire, Georgiana. There's a movie called The Duchess where Keira Knightley plays her. Keira just has so many ties to Chatsworth House. Chatsworth House, honestly. She was kind of a distant descendant of Princess Diana's. She's compared to Diana a lot, or Diana's compared to her a lot, just kind of how she was a girl on the scene. I just recently, actually, when I was in London, listened to a nonfiction book about her. Her life was so interesting. Like she was very involved in politics, which in the 1700s was not like that common. She had a way of kind of swaying votes. She would use her fashion as political statements. She had a horrible gambling problem. Honestly, a little bit of a brutal death. She had like this crazy eye infection, and then the doctors obviously didn't know what they were doing and really fucked it up, and that was a bit sad. But she had an affair and had a child she had to give up, and it is just like her life is so wild. So I knew about Georgina, and that is kind of why I wanted to go to Chatsworth House, and I just always associated her as Duchess of Devonshire. But obviously time goes on and the family goes on and the dukedom is passed down, and we get to this book where Kik falls in love with the heir to Chatsworth House, and he is a future Duke of Devonshire. And I'm just going to say it because it's history, and I feel like I have to just tell you the whole story. So this is when it gets so crazy. So he unfortunately dies in World War II, and his younger brother, then inherits the dukedom. And the younger brother was married to a Mitford, and the Mitfords are one of my niche historical interests. This family is so crazy. So there are, I think, 5 sisters, and talk about being so different. So one of them, Diana, she was married to a Guinness, yes, of that beer family, left him to marry Oswald Mosley, who is the head of the Buff, which is the British Union of Fascists. If you watch Peaky Blinders, Sam Claflin played Oswald Mosley on that show, and Diana is a character in the show on like the second to last season. Another sister, Unity, was Hitler's mistress and was obsessed with Hitler. Then we have Nancy Mitford, who was a famous writer and ended up like spying on her sisters for like Winston Churchill and like the Allies in World War II. Then there was another one, Jessica, who was a communist and ended up like moving to America. And then there is Deborah, who married the guy who ended up becoming the Duke of Devonshire because his older brother, Kit Kennedy's fiance, died. Crazy. Like you cannot make this shit up. So when I went to Chatsworth House, it was just so many interesting things at once, and it was kind of cool walking around to know that if that twist of fate didn't happen and he didn't die in World War II, a Kennedy would have become like the mistress of this giant, grand, beautiful estate. Really, calling it a house is crazy. Like it is not a house, it is a mansion. But so in this book, you follow Kik's love story, and it's kind of like the English society looks down on her because she's kind of seen as like this American upstart. And there's a lot of like interesting like societal things at play. It's really cool because obviously JFK is in the book, but he's not a main character. You see him as he's very young, like RFK is very young. Their sisters, like all of the sisters I found so interesting. The sister who was lobotomized is in this, and that is kind of like not a huge, but it is a plot line. I just really loved that America is fascinated with the Kennedys. I mean, same, I get it. And I loved that the spotlight is being shown in this on the women and not the men. And like, I would love, honestly, like somebody listening, please write a historical fiction about RFK and Ethel. Like, I want that so badly. but I loved Kick. I thought she was so strong. She was so fun. She comes up in other historical fiction that I read, specifically like British ones, because of her relationship with her fiance. So this is just, if you like the Kennedys, if you are looking for a fun, it is American, but it's in England, and like you see the differences between the Americans and the English at play. I highly recommend this. I loved it so much. And like I said, it will always hold a special place in my heart because me and my grandma just really connected over it. And like I said in our last conversation, she was talking to me about this book like years after we had read it. So thank you to Kerri for magically orchestrating that moment without realizing it. That is the Kennedy Debutante by Kerri Maher. Actually, Kerri also, all of her historical fiction is great, highly recommend, but she also has one about Grace Kelly, another remarkable American woman, and Sylvia Beach, who opened Shakespeare & Co. in Paris and published James Joyce's Ulysses. So definitely check out her other historical fiction about amazing American women. All right, it's time to time travel again, just about 20 years to 1953 for our final book, By Her Own Design by Piper Huguley. This is a fashion historical fiction. So by that, I mean it is about the life of a fashion designer. My first love is fashion. Books come second, which might be surprising to some of you listening. I grew up obsessed with fashion. I worked in fashion for 5 years. I went to fashion school. I went to the Fashion Institute of Technology, or FIT. So I've just always been so into fashion, and I love fashion history. Like, that is really my favorite part of it. I love learning the stories behind the houses and everything that went into it and the businesses. And I just like learning the stories of these famous designers. I love it so much. I love going like I recently went to, I'm going to talk about, the Met has a really great exhibit on women designing women. I just love seeing these like historic fashion pieces in real life. And because I went to FIT, I think that, I mean, I loved it before, but being at FIT kind of fueled it. Like, I took a fashion history class. The FIT archives are really cool. So I've seen like just so many amazing pieces. When I was on my UK trip, I went to the V&A a few times because their fashion exhibit is so good. It's like fashion from the 1700s to now, and it just covers so much. It is like, if you were in London, highly recommend going to see that. I went twice because I was just like so obsessed. But this is about a designer who I had never heard about until I picked this up, which really pissed me off. So this book is about Anne Lowe, who is a Black fashion designer. A lot of it was ready to wear, but she really was like dabbled in couture. She was dressing the absolute elite. She designed Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress, and I didn't know who this woman was. And this pisses me off so much. And it's obviously because she was a Black woman and history just like glanced over that. But like, I am someone who, I study fashion history for fun. I literally went to fashion school. How was I not taught who this woman was? Like, my mind was blown when I learned who she was, especially that she designed Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress. But I'm so happy that I know who Anne is now, and I'm so excited to share her story with you guys on this episode. So the book opens in 1953, and we're in New York City in her studio, and a pipe bursts and it destroys a bunch of dresses. And this is a true story. And the dresses were Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress and all of her bridesmaids' dresses. So she is freaking out and this is like the set up to be the biggest moment of her career. She's finally going to get the publicity and all of her due, and she's freaking out. So she enlists some help, and they get to work rescuing these dresses. Then we transport back to 1912, where we meet her as a child. She is the daughter of former slaves, and she is growing up in Jim Crow, Alabama. And like I said, it's 1912. So this was so interesting to read. She has a really strong unit with her mom and her grandmother. They teach her how to sew. She is like, she's very talented, clearly, from a young age, and we kind of watch her grow up. She falls into a very bad marriage at a very young age, which is like shocking to read. He was extremely abusive. Years go on, and eventually she escapes to Florida, where she catches the attention. Well, first she's like she was with her husband, I think maybe in North Carolina, and she catches the attention of this woman who is like a socialite, like head of society in Florida. And this woman kind of saves her from her abusive husband. And she was like, you and your child come to Florida. I will take care of you and you will design all of my clothes. So she does. And she starts gaining, because she's designing just for this one woman, she starts gaining her clothes are getting a lot of attention from the other society women, and she eventually is able to open up her own shop, which was just like always her dream. And you see her career like really blossom and bloom, and like famous women are like coming in and out of it. I'm pretty sure Marjorie Post was one of her clients, who Alison Pataki has a great historical fiction about her. She ends up in New York. Like, I don't want to like give everything away, but she is suddenly in the big department stores, but she's always kind of like being undersold, not like really getting as much publicity and recognition as she should be. And then it is not mentioned in the papers that she designed Jackie's wedding dress, and that is a huge moment. We follow Anne pretty much over the course of her whole life. I love this so much. It is so inspiring. Like, if you're not into fashion, I think you would still enjoy this story. It is just like the fashion is just her. I mean, it's her life, but it's like her job, but this is the story of an inspiring, strong, like remarkable woman. I am so mad I didn't know who Anne was before, but I'm so happy that I know her now. And just this week, I finally got to see one of her designs. So in that exhibit, I mentioned Women Designing Women. They have one of Anne's dresses from 1968 on display. And she got famous, and she was known for these flowers that she would make and like put on her dresses. And the dress that they had there had the flowers on it. It was so beautiful, like just such a beautiful design, the structure and the darting and everything. It was so well constructed. It was so beautiful. And I didn't know that dress was going to be there. And I fully freaked out. And I just had a moment, and I was sitting there looking at this dress, and I was like, this is just like the intersection of so many things that I love: fashion, history, celebrating like remarkable women. It was so cool, and I'm so happy that her dress is on display in the Met right now at that exhibit. The exhibit ends in March, so if you're in New York, highly recommend going to see it before then. There's really great, like there's a 1927 Chanel silk suit. There is a 1938 Schiaparelli evening jacket that I'm obsessed with, that actually was mentioned in the historical fiction I just read, The Last Collection, which is about the rivalry between Coco Chanel and Elsa Schiaparelli. Just so much great stuff. Also, like a more recent Sarah Burton for McQueen, which is just such a huge fan of all McQueen, but I loved Sarah Burton stuff. I was so happy. I was so upset, not happy, when she left. So it's a really great exhibit. It's pretty small, but go to see this Anne Lowe, and now you know a bit of her story. I highly recommend picking up this book. I could not put it down. I actually read this in 2022. Like, I started the night before I was going to BravoCon, and the whole weekend I was at BravoCon, I was like, I can't wait to go home and read my book, which, like, you guys know, for me to say that during BravoCon is crazy, but it was so good. I'm so happy that I read it. When I had posted about it, the author commented and was like, thank you for reading. And I was like, no, thank you for bringing Anne's story to the forefront. I'm so happy that I know her now. And like I said, it was so exciting to see her design on display at the Met, of all places. So exciting. So those are the three main reviews for the episode. I did just list off a few other books to mention, even though I mentioned probably 50 books throughout, because I can't help myself. But America's First Daughter is about Thomas Jefferson's daughter, who acted as his first lady, which that's a really great one. And They Called It Camelot is about Jackie Kennedy. And then The First Ladies is about Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune, who was a Black woman who really propelled the civil rights movement and their friendship, which I did not know about until I read this book last year. It is so interesting to see how Mary kind of helped influence Eleanor, who then in turn influenced her husband, FDR. And Eleanor is my favorite first lady, fun fact. Time to do some mood reads. So first up, from Bookstagram, Dunler Milfin Books is in the mood for a magical realism set in New York City. And I mean, I don't even have to think a second about it. The number one answer is The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I'm obsessed with Ashley Poston. I love her romance books. They all have a fun little magical realism element. I also love the Dead Romantics, but The 7-Year Slip feels more New York than the Dead Romantics does, so highly recommend. Next, from Bookstagram, Bitches Be Bookin' is in the mood for a light, fun, quick read. And for that, I would say check and mate. This is Ali Hazelwood's YA book. It does not read YA. It's so much fun. It is about chess, which like I'm not a chess girly, but it like gave me the Queen's Gambit vibes. It is so good, so cute. It does deal with like every romance. I feel like there's some heavier topics involved, but such a good fun read. And the final one is from Lady Bra on Bookstagram, and she is in the mood for Mean Girls vibes. And for that, I say The Legacies by Jessica Goodman. This is a YA thriller set in like New York City elite. It's a little bit more Gossip Girl, but you do get Mean Girls vibes from, I mean, Gossip Girl is Mean Girls vibes, right? So yes, those are all of our books for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure you're following, subscribe to every single on every podcast platform you're listening on. Follow me on Instagram at Kerri Watt. Follow the show at Professional Book Girl. Read the February book club pick, The Frozen River by Ashley. No, is that her name? Ashley Lawhon? Yeah, I don't know. Okay, maybe that's wrong. I don't know. The episode comes out on February 29th. Thank you so much for listening. Happy reading.